Hello and happy 2023. I'm Stephen Heverin, and I'm a Senior Technical Account Manager at AWS, and I'm based out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Welcome to AWS Supports You, where AWS support experts provide tips to optimize performance in the cloud, lower costs, and provide you with best practices and design considerations.
Hey everyone, my name is Clint Wyckoff, and I'll be co-hosting today with Stephen, and I'm an Enterprise Support Manager here at AWS. And today we have an extra special guest as well as topic to focus on. Now, typically at AWS Supports You, we have technical topics where we talk about best practice and design considerations that Stephen just mentioned. Today, we're actually going to pivot a little bit and talk about the AWS blog as well as Amazon's leadership principles. And who better to aid us in this conversation than none other than AWS's VP of Evangelism, Jeff Barr. Jeff, welcome to AWS Supports You.
All right, I'm super happy to be here, Stephen and Cliff. I'm coming to you today from my home office in Seattle.
Perfect. Welcome to the show. Jeff, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your busy day to join us.
So thanks, Jeff. So today, as mentioned, we'll be discussing the origins of AWS Blog and focusing on its practices. So, Clint, before we get into the details, you want to give us the rest of what's going on?
Yeah, for sure. And for the attendees online, thanks for taking a few minutes out of your busy day to join us. The Twitch stream, be sure to utilize the question and answer section on the right-hand side. We'll be taking a few breaks periodically throughout the course of today's episode. So add your questions to the chat. We'll discuss those and get Jeff's perspective on everything we can there. Live as part of the show. Additionally, we're interested in your feedback. So we're going to toss a link to our survey, and this gives you, the viewers, the opportunity to let us know what you'd like to see more of on AWS Supports You, and perhaps maybe one of your ideas might wind up being a topic for a future episode. Stephen?
Cool. Thanks, Clint. And as much as if you have questions, if you have comments, be sure to put them in the chat as we go along. We definitely want to hear your questions from you during the show. So, Jeff, before we jump into the origins of the blog, can you explain why it, and specifically the practice around the AWS blog, would be important to our audience?
Well, I really think that in such a rapidly evolving field as cloud computing and specifically AWS, the idea that you have a place to go to where you can very quickly and efficiently learn about what's new is really important. And that's what I thought at the very beginning when I started, and that's held true to this day.
Cool. Thanks. So with the blog, you want to get into a little bit more about how it started. It's been a while since you started it. So
it has been. And I actually started writing in late 2004. I think it was November of 2004. And prior to that time, and this was way before we'd launched any of the AWS infrastructure services. At that point, I already had the title of Web Services Evangelist at Amazon. And my product portfolio was some of our earlier web services, including we have what was called it was originally called the e-commerce service, and it gave our developer customers access to the Amazon product catalog. It's gone through a whole bunch of different names over time, but it gave developers access to the Amazon product catalog. We had several other information services. So my initial role as an evangelist was to talk about those services. And this was so early on that we didn't have really what you could think of as a traditional marketing department. So it really fell to me to spread the word of all these different services. Now, kind of coming up into 2004, I started to see all of this energy going into all this definitions and plans being made for all these infrastructure services for S3 and SQS and EC2. And I'm kind of getting the sense that a lot is about to happen, and realizing that I'm the only person really responsible for communicating it. I started to think a lot about personal scalability and how can I get my voice out to more people without being even busier than I was at the time. My children were very young at the time, and I couldn't do any more travel than what I was doing at that point. And a blog was just a very natural way to say, okay, I can create content and I can get it out to a big audience very efficiently.
So Jeff, as part of that, like, did you have to get any approval or anything like that? Like, how did you get buy-in from leadership that creating a blog was worthwhile?
So it was definitely a really interesting challenge because we were trying to do something very different when we were thinking about launching AWS, where instead of, if you think of the traditional software companies of the days before the cloud, there would be very infrequent, very, very large launches. You'd eagerly await the newest operating system or the newest release of Office, something like that. And those were few and far between. They'd be much rumored and anticipated. And every couple of years, there'd be a big burst of activity of a launch. And somehow I got the sense that we were going to do things very differently with AWS, and that it was going to be something very regular and very frequent. And so that we need to have this ongoing communication channel. So what we do at Amazon when we're trying to propose something new, we write a document, typically called a narrative document. And you basically say, here's the problem I'd like to solve, and here's how I propose to solve it. Now, thinking back, I think we were a little bit less formal about this back then, but I remember writing this document and sharing it with Andy Jassy, sharing it with Drew Herdner, who was running our PR and who's still part of PR. And they certainly understood the basic idea, but because it was going to be a fairly direct communication channel, and we were very controlled in our PR back in those days. And there was a multi-level approval process. There was a lot of review you had to go through. And it was kind of clear that a blog had to be a little bit different. So the biggest challenge was to figure out how could we do that efficiently and not have to get multiple people in the loop for review. And at a certain point, after a lot of discussion, I remember feeling just a little frustrated because I'm not the world's most corporate person. I'm more kind of just let's just kind of jump in and do it. And I got a coupon for 1,000 free days of this blogging platform called TypePad. And without giving it a huge amount of thought, I just put 2 posts together. And I said, well, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what I'm doing. Here's 2 posts. And after quite a lot of discussion where it wasn't quite clear, maybe I wasn't really making quite clear exactly what I wanted out of a blog, that when I put those first 2 posts up, everybody looked at it right away and said, oh, now we understand what you're talking about, Jeff. This looks great. We settled upon a few ground rules. And one of the things I do remember is that they said, like everything at Amazon, we're going to treat this as a bit of an experiment. And if it doesn't work out, we do reserve the right to take it offline. The funny thing is, it took years and years and years before it really got back to me that they actually really liked what I was doing, to the point where it was thought of as one of the most important parts of marketing at the time. And so I kind of had that challenge of saying, I need to make this so good and so awesome and so worthwhile that there's no possible way that they'd want to take it offline.
Jeff, go into that. One of the comments you've made in the past was it was sometimes some of these things are very hard for us to explain. And it seems like the blog, we think now it's a very common format. It's a very common thing that we get nowadays. It's all over the place. Early on, it wasn't. So was it more that you had to show them, here's what I mean, versus trying to describe it in a narrative or a document of some sort?
Well, I think at that point, when people thought, if we go back to 2004 and say, what is a blog? It was either personal expression of some sort, where someone's not really talking about deep tech subjects, or it's some level of someone trying to make some kind of trouble. And that neither of those was my actual intent. It was always my intent to be helpful to the audience and helpful to our customer or to our internal teams that are building great services, and to simply take what we're doing and make sure it is well understood and exposed to a big audience. And now that I think about it, this idea that I should have simply built that prototype was clearly the right thing to have done way back then. But there's a lot of things that are never obvious until you look back on them after a lot of experience to the contrary.
So the way that you explained getting started with the AWS blog there, you mentioned 2 peculiar things that are core to the Amazon culture. The first one being a narrative and PR FAQ document. Second one being the 2-way door, and how basically all decisions and things that are done within Amazon, are built around the premise of moving quickly. It's better to do something than nothing, and you can always innovate and iterate on it as it moves forward. from a blog perspective, like how do you incorporate, those peculiar ways, the PRFAQ narrative and the two-way door decision along with the other leadership principles in the way that you guys write blogs?
Sure. So the two-way door decision, I think, was most appropriate when we were getting started. When like everything we start off on at Amazon, we think of it as some kind of an experiment. We say, well, we're going to give it a shot, and if it works, we will take it and we're going to accelerate it, and we'll put some more fuel on the fire and build it up. If it doesn't work, we're going to figure out why not and iterate a bit. And at the very kind of, if we suddenly say, there's no way we can make this work, we'll just take it away and say, sorry, this didn't work. Right. So that's definitely that two-way door model of thinking that we can try things. And if they don't work, well, we'll step back a bit and understand why it didn't work and iterate until we can make it work. And as far as using leadership principles, in addition to my duties as chief evangelist and blogger, I often am asked to explain what we call the Amazon culture of innovation, which we abbreviate COI. I've explained that probably hundreds of times in formal and informal settings to customers and to different audiences. And so I was deeply familiar with the different Amazon leadership principles. And back around, it was 2016. So up until 2016, 2004 to 2016, I was really the only person focused on the blog. When requests would come in, they would come into my inbox, and not knowing any better, I pretty much accepted every request, and I would blog about everything that came in, and I dealt with all of there wasn't even decision making. It was like, here's a piece of news, just I'd write a blog post about it, and that was really good for the early days. It got to be a scaling challenge as I got busier and busier, and to the point where we get to the time before reInvent, and I would have several dozen blog posts in active circulation in those early days. And in 2016, we finally figured out, well, we need to figure out a way to help me to scale. And we hired a person named Anna. She came in and she helped to set up a ticketing system to make sure that when requests were made for a blog, the requester would create a ticket. We had an evaluation model so we could figure out what blogs we would work on. And then we started bringing on additional bloggers. And we wanted to make sure that those additional bloggers really kind of understood the way that we liked to think and to work within the blog team. And having spent so much time with customers explaining the Amazon leadership principles, I had this great idea one day, and I said, well, why don't I just take all of the titles of the LPs, I'll keep those all as is, and I'm just going to rewrite the definition of each one of these so that it matches how we would like to operate within the news blog team. This turned out to be a much better idea than I realized. It was something I did pretty quickly, and you don't always realize until later that you've done something that is actually like, wow, that was a nice step forward or a good invention. And so as we would bring new folks onto the team, they already were Amazonians, so they'd gone through our hiring process. They understood the LPs. They were eating, sleeping, and breathing those LPs. So when I said, well, you already know the titles, here's a set of new and customized definitions, they got it right away. And so other than one really minor edit, the same document has withstood the test of time, and I'm still using the one I put together in 2016.
So Jeff, going back to you had talked about getting these articles and not necessarily saying no to any of them to write them. And I've heard you mention in the past becoming an instant expert on that. Can you share a little bit more about, what does that mean to come in and become an instant expert on something? Again, when you're talking about some of those leadership principles, like earning trust with the customer, how do you become an instant expert and make sure that you're giving good information and accurate information in writing all these different topics?
This is what makes the job of a blogger for AWS really, really fun. And I think that as a blogger, it's way too easy to hide the fact that you are not an expert. And if you do that, you come across as this kind of really annoying know-it-all. that whatever the topic might be, that somehow that this one blogger knows more than the entire audience combined. I would much rather be authentic and genuine and say, hey, I'm not an expert on any of these things, but maybe I'm good at being a pretty quick study. And I can, we have a leadership principle called diving deep. And so with diving deep, when something brand new does come along, the challenge is to say, well, this is a brand new topic and maybe I don't know a whole lot about it, but hey, this is actually a great opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for me. I can spend some time experimenting, reading, asking the actual experts for some information. And the reality, it's sometimes like when you're teaching a class on a new subject for the first time, where you're the teacher, and if you're really lucky, you might be a week or two ahead of your students, and it feels like that all the time as a blogger. So I will fully admit if I'm writing about something that I'm new to, like when I had to write about quantum computing. So I didn't do especially well in math or science in high school or in college. I love both those topics. I read a lot about them all the time, but I'm still an amateur, and there's still plenty that I don't understand anything at all about. But when the topic of quantum computing came about, I said, wow, this is something I think would be super fun to learn about. And I probably spent an entire day reading Wikipedia articles and making some mind maps, so I actually understood what I was talking about. And I put my first blog post together, and with fingers crossed, hoping I got it right, I sent it off to the actual experts and just was prepared for the absolute worst as far as the feedback coming back of like, you totally misunderstood it, you got it all wrong. And the first comments were about punctuation. So I was like, oh my gosh, I actually got it all right. So not so bad after all. So, but I will say that everybody's mind works differently. But after I do one of these deep dives, the essence remains with me only for a little bit of time, and then we move on to the next topic, and then you dive deep on that, and then you say, wow, and as a weird result, sometimes I look back at the older blog posts and I think, wow, I used to know a lot of good stuff back then, and I've somehow forgotten it all. But that's just what kind of comes with the territory of being so lucky as to be part of this just innovation stream.
So, one of my favorite parts about working at AWS and Amazon in general, Jeff, is no matter what part of the organization that you work in, we all can revert back to the leadership principles and find that as a common ground. So regardless if, I'm chatting with you or Steven or somebody on the Amazon side of the fence as part of a hiring process or something like that, we can always revert back to the leadership principles. And, part of the blog team there, you mentioned dive deep. I would venture to guess another large one there would be learn and be curious as well. But the one I want to sort of understand a little bit here is the insist on high standards. So oftentimes service teams and product managers are going to come to you and ask to write a blog post. Like what sort of process do you and the blog team go through to make sure that not only the service is up to the standards and ready, and sort of like, what does all that process look like for you? I think that would be interesting to chat about.
This is one of my favorite parts, and one where you must proceed with a lot of respect and a lot of caution for the service teams. So we know for sure that these service teams have put a lot of energy into understanding who their customers are and figuring out what a customer need is, and then defining, building, and getting ready to ship something to meet all those needs. And I fully grasp that that's a really difficult thing to do. Now, with that said, at the point when we as bloggers get to see the first iteration of the new service, and we get to see the APIs and the documentation and the console and the command line, we get to take a look. And it's quite often the case that we are the first people to really get to see this and to put it through its paces. And what will happen is sometimes the team maybe they've kind of idealized what they're doing in their own minds. And they kind of think, okay, it's really great. And you do this and this and this, and all these amazing things happen. And ta-da, you've now created a resource, launched a thing, whatever particular thing it's supposed to do. But then as bloggers, we didn't participate in the development process necessarily. And we get to look at everything with a set of fresh eyes. And for the most part, everything is awesome, and it kind of tracks with where the team thinks they are. But sometimes it's maybe not as easy as they thought it should be, or the flow isn't quite right. And what we have to do is we have to very delicately balance the fact that we know this team is very eager to ship and get this product out to customers versus understanding that the customers really have a certain level of expectations from us. And we need to then communicate. If we find things that we are not fully in agreement with, let's say, we have to communicate these back to the team, all the way while realizing that this team has been working really hard for a long time to get to where they are, and never insulting them, never slighting their effort, always treating them with a lot of respect, and affording them a dignity of saying, well, this is a challenge, and this is where we're at, and this is where we hope to go. And at the same time, representing the customers and saying, dear team, I fully respect what you've done, but I find this part a little bit confusing and challenging. And sometimes that might mean we offer them some alternate ways to do it. So we get a little bit looped into the design process. I actually remember spending several hours trying to get a couple of words changed on a console screen, where the initial set of 2 or 3 or 4 words that describe an option, I found very, very confusing. And the amount of energy that we put into deciding on a better set of 3 or 4 words was really well worth it. And I think we all know that when you're in the middle of the creative process, it's very easy to create a lot of content, but sometimes creating that right 3 or 4 words of content is a lot harder. And so being someone who is playing with words for a living effectively, sometimes that the right 3 or 4 words might come to me a little bit more easily than they do to someone who's building things with code for a living. So we try to give that benefit. And sometimes this is wording of messages, sometimes it's a little bit of flow. But we also do recognize that sometimes the team will come back and they'll say, we're totally in agreement. We already understand this is where we're at. This is where we need to get to. We need to get this part out so we can actually start getting customer feedback and getting on to the next bit. But we'll take what you say seriously. And it's a very delicate balancing act, and one that we approach with just the corresponding amount of care.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, Stephen. You mentioned quite a few things there that so we did toss a link earlier on in the chat to the Amazon leadership principles. So if you're not familiar with those, everybody, I strongly encourage you to check them out, because they are a core part of literally what every Amazonian lives and breathes on a daily basis. The one that I would just highlight there, Jeff, you mentioned customer obsession, stuck out to me from the blog team perspective. The other one would also be the have backbone, disagree, and commit. So you were not afraid to stand up and speak your mind to service teams in a very professional, and cordial way, and partner with them, to try to fix things. So to the viewers in the chat, thanks for taking a few minutes to join us on the AWS Supports You Twitch stream. We have several viewers from Boston, and I see somebody
India, Brazil.
Thanks for everybody for tuning in. So Stephen, I'll toss it over to you.
Sure. So Jeff, I was going to say, so really you have 2 customers that you're serving with the blog: your internal customers of the service teams and our external customers. With that though, I have to say, in my own experience, again, to echo what Clint said, that the leadership principles really for us provide a common language for us to be able to kind of communicate and understand each other quickly and pretty well. You had mentioned spending some time on 3 or 4 words, but I have that same issue, and it's amazing the impact when you just make a change to a sentence that may not be a lot, that can have and really change the tone of something and better communicate what it is. And that's something that I have to work on as well. So as you talked about the tenets and taking this and writing them down out, putting them in the context of the blog and the blog team, I guess, how did you help the blog team? How did you get more people involved in writing for you when you realized, hey, I can't keep doing this on my own? And then how did you recruit people and pull them in to help them get up to speed and find their voice?
Sure. So what we've actually found is that within the company, there's always been a lot of folks who have had a desire to be bloggers. And so we always have effectively kind of a waiting list of folks that would like to have kind of a couple of years of their career where part-time they'll be contributing to the news blog. And I only participate peripherally in this because we have such a great team that is letting me focus on creating content. We have such basically what we'll do is a lot of the folks that are now writing for the news blog have spent some time writing for other AWS blogs, maybe compute or database or serverless, and they will often bring that content to us as kind of their portfolio. Now we do tend to do things a bit differently on the news blog in that when you look at posts on our other blogs, you'll find that those blogs are designed to really go in depth. You'll find multi-thousand-word articles. You'll find part 1 and part 2. By very definite choice and by adhering to the frugality leadership principle, we never do multi-part posts. And we try to keep our posts somewhere between generally like 700 to 900 words. We're always trying to kind of pick the right number, but we don't want to overload our audience with too much content. And so what we will do is, as part of bringing somebody new online, we'll share the blog leadership principles with them. And then something I've been doing for quite a while now and find myself doing even more than in the past is that I will personally review at least one draft of every blogger's content. And the intent is not to make them all write like me, because a lot of them are much better writers than I am. The intent is just to help them communicate their thoughts as clearly as possible. We have this really awesome team that is spread across time zones and geographies. And for some of them, English is their first language. For some, it's their second or their third. And it's just really fun, actually, to get to work with all these folks and to, especially the busy times and the month leading up to reInvent, because we have this kind of global circuit of content creation. I'd wake up every morning, I get down here to my office, and there'd be sometimes 8 or 10 new drafts of fun, awesome stuff to read and comment on. And so my practice is always take care of that first. I never want to be blocking somebody else's work. So before I do any of my own work, I would review all of that. And we use our work docs tool to do that and route the comments back. And but I make it really clear. My goal is only to help people to be the best communicator they can be. And it's never to make a bunch of bloggers that write in the same way I do. We actually want people to find their own voice and find their own particular way to communicate that works for them.
So Jeff, reverting back to the chat here, there's been a couple of questions that have come in. And the first one I want to focus here is from the Tech Guy 21. For bloggers that aren't on Twitter or other social media, what's the best way to reach out to them or get in touch to learn more about details?
That's going to vary dependent on the blogger, but I would suspect that most of our colleagues are available on LinkedIn and would be responsive to some feedback. If I know that a lot of times that on the other blogs that you'll see occasional blogs from time to time from individuals that aren't regular contributors. Some of our colleagues will just take a goal that they'll write and publish a couple posts per year. In those cases, a good thing to do is just go visit that blog and see who the regular contributors are. See if you can track down one of them and say, hey, I read this post on the compute blog. I see you're a regular blogger. I'm trying to get in touch with this other blogger who's just kind of here from time to time. Can you help me out a bit? And we all try to be customer obsessed and to respond to those kind of requests.
That's good advice. The other thing that I would say there, the Tech Guys, you can, if you'd like, for this specific one here, since you asked it on the show, if you want to email us, awssupportsyou@amazon.com, I will help you chase down the person that you're looking for there. That's a good opportunity for you. Also, if there's other topics for future episodes of AWS Supports You, you can let us know using that email address also. So Jeff, one thing that sticks out to me here, you've written over 3,100 blogs at AWS. Congratulations on that. That's a lot of effort. You've been at Amazon now for 20 plus years. How do you always how do you ensure it's day one in your mentality and not sort of have that day two, outlook on things? How do you stay fresh?
Oh, that's an awesome question. So I genuinely enjoy technology, and I have since I was probably like 4 or 5 years old. I remember being super young and being a fan of the space program, before we even landed men on the moon, and being a fan of the space program, and somehow grasping from a really early age that technology was super fun and super cool and always changing. And I always wanted to be on the leading edge of things. I do also remember early in my career in IT, this was, I was probably, I couldn't have been more than like 21 or so. And I was a big, at this point, like mainframes and mini computers were the big deal, and microcomputers and PCs were just kind of emerging as something you could use to do really serious work. I remember talking to what then felt like these like really old people. Probably they were like 40, which is a lot younger than I am now. But these really old people were so stuck in their ways. And we talk about what was new and what was about to happen, and they're like, oh, none of this stuff's ever going to work. It's never gonna. We're so these mainframes and mini computers, they're absolutely perfect. They're gonna just do everything we possibly could ever need. And I remember just thinking, I don't really want to grow up to be like that. And always thinking I'd much rather be on that fun leading edge where there's always something new, where there's always a piece of technology that I have today that didn't exist yesterday. And then kind of accepting with that the fact that when you get exposed to all this new technology, it's not fully fleshed out. It's not fully defined. It's not always perfect. And that's actually this awesome opportunity, because if you adopt something new and you try it out a little bit, by definition, the user base is pretty small. And so that always means that if you are a fan of this new thing, you can almost always, especially now, you can go online, you can find the creators of whatever this device or content or software and say, hey, I'm a user, I'm a fan, here's my feedback, keep on going. And so you don't just get to be this passive consumer of it, you get to actually help to encourage its development. And so I put this into just a lot of the different kinds of content that I see and consume. It's just trying to be a fan and connecting back to the author. And so to me, that directly plays into blogging, of saying, okay, I'm a big fan of all of our teams and all the amazing things that they create. And then I as part of customer obsession, I do think of the blog teams as our customer, not the blog teams, the service teams. The service teams are our customer, and part of our job to keep that customer happy is they've been working so hard to get this perfect product defined, built, and shipped. On the blog team, we need to justify all that hard work and make sure it's actually visible to the reader customers.
Right.
So we do very explicitly think of having the customers that are the readers of the blog and the customers that are the creators of the services that we are, and we do our best to address both of them.
Jeff, so I think what you're saying is it doesn't sound like there's a struggle for your day one mentality there. You always seem to find something new and exciting for you every day to look at.
I am buried in new launches and services and cool books and bits and pieces of cool things that people share with me. And the only challenge is actually keeping my there's a little filter in my brain that says, that's kind of interesting. And I keep having to kind of turn the dial up, and so that things have to get more and more interesting before I can pay some attention to them. And but that's a good situation to be in.
So we've got a question.
Just a sec. I see the sunlight's coming in Seattle, and it's making me look dark. You right back here. Okay, there we go.
Hold on.
We actually get a lot of
Jeff.
We get a lot of sun from the south here in Seattle. And
you don't have an automation for that shade?
Bingo.
Yeah.
That'll be the next project. So we have a question from VJ 1900 and wants to know if there's any plans to collaborate with OpenAI to improve Code Whisperer, and can you talk about how Code Whisperer was developed?
Those are both awesome questions, and the one part of my job that I don't get to do as much as I would like to is really be kind of deeply in the middle of things with all the different dev teams and understand how they build services and how they make the different decisions. So unfortunately, I don't get to participate in the dev process at all. So we would have to really refer that to the Code Whisperer team to get information. The weird part of my job is that during the part when we're getting ready to do a launch and I've read the PR FAQ, I've drafted the first draft of the blog post, we're iterating really quickly on a couple additional versions. I'll be really tight with the service team, and we'll go back and forth multiple times a day. We'll have some calls, we'll have some chats like this, and I get to know them pretty well. And then we launch, and then I don't hear from them for quite a while. And then if we're lucky, we run into each other at a customer event or a summit or at reInvent. So it's you make a lot of very, very kind of quick friendships that you don't always get to sustain over a longer period of time. So I don't always get to kind of know the intimate details of how they build these services.
So I'll take that time then to mention to VJ1900 and anyone else on there, if you have any questions that we don't get to today or we're not able to answer, you can head over to repost.aws, where you can ask those questions and they can get answered there, and they may even become a future topic for a show that we do here down the line.
Yeah, so VJ, that'd be a good one for the Code Whisperer section on Repost, and perhaps a product manager or a specialist SA or an SME in that area would be able to help guide you there. Jeff, the next one came in from Dev to Ved. Given the fast-paced releases AWS services go through, how do you ensure the blog posts are kept up to date throughout the months and year moving forward?
Okay, so we don't actually. We look at the posts as a snapshot at a point in time that says, at the date where we put this blog post out, here is the absolute latest and greatest news, and here's what it is, and here's what it does, and here's how it works. And we do take the point of view that the blog is just this kind of snapshot in time. If we do get to the point where subsequent events have made the post, there's a difference in our heads between it's outdated because it doesn't cover every last feature, or it's now inaccurate because something that we said is now considered wrong. If it's actually wrong, what we'll do is we'll examine the situation pretty closely, and if it is indeed the case, we'll put a note at the top that says update. We'll put the date on it. We'll say we've changed something in this blog post because subsequent events have changed the relevance of this content. Here's a newer piece of content that could help you out some more. We do think of these blog posts as effectively a bit of a historical record of AWS. And so we would never go in and silently change something just to make it reflect reality. In a very few cases, we've gone to very old posts that were like things from 2005 to 2010. Some of those very old ones, most of the links are dead, and we occasionally will go through and just remove some of the links just because the internet changes so quickly. Right. But we don't actually go back and make edits to old posts. That's like this weird n-squared problem that we'd never ever get to if we had to reevaluate every post in light of all the new posts, we'd never finish.
And I think, and we are sharing out the link to your first blog post to show that, we don't necessarily go back and edit those. And it's definitely a good history and archive to see there over time. So we have another question from Emo Girl Lover. Anything you're doing to incentivize third parties or AWS partners to provide blogs on AWS product offerings?
Sure. So as far as incentives, what we generally, we don't have like a formal program of any sort, but we do love to see those kinds of content written, and we love to see content written about our services and how to put them to use from almost any vantage point. And kind of my personal incentive I always offer is if you write that kind of content and bring it to my attention, I'll do my best to review it and to share it broadly. So I think the incentive is basically, we'll help you get this to a wider audience.
Nice. So I have a question for you, Jeff. This is one that I came up with, and so you're 3,100 blog posts deep into the AWS blog. What was the most difficult blog for you to write?
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, personally, the one that was the hardest wasn't about a launch. It was actually about, we in the early days of the blog, one of my colleagues was this great guy, Mike Culver, who we actually shared an office with. And Mike actually went through pancreatic cancer and passed away. And he was so well known to the AWS community back in the day that there was no way I could actually let that pass by without making sure that the world knew what a great person Mike was. And I went to PR. I kind of apologetically said, hey, I'm sorry to even have to ask this, but would it be okay if I wrote just a little memorial just to recognize Mike's contributions to AWS and to kind of remember his life? And the response was like, Jeff, not only could you do that, but you really have to. Mike was such an awesome person to do it. And I put this little post together and kind of put my heart really into it. And it turned out that Mike was not a person who really shared his job at all with his family very much. And they didn't know really what he did for a living. And so when we went to Mike's memorial service, I heard from his children, his wife, from his siblings who said, you gave us this picture of Mike we never actually knew. He was a great guy, but he never told us what he did for a living. And I go back and look at that post, and it still brings a lot of tears to my eyes, and I still can hear Mike's voice. And it's like recognizing somebody like that and just kind of recognizing their contribution and the person they were. It was not an easy post to write. And I still think of how painfully difficult it was to lose Mike, but it felt so right to just kind of put a little summary of who he was into that blog post for him. So I don't know if that was the kind of answer you're looking for, but that was.
No, it's remarkable. Like, I think it goes
hard to do.
I think it goes a long way, Jeff, and I think it comes across, like, you can feel the passion in how you describe that. And I can only imagine how difficult that was to write, but it also sort of shows how the relationships that we have at work are larger than just, work relationships. We're friends, we're colleagues, we're going to stay connected afterwards. You have a real impact amongst each other.
Indeed. There's always people inside. Ultimately, it's too easy to get lost in tech and think it's like bits and bytes and feeds and APIs and stuff. But there's actually people inside of all these things, and there's people that are putting their heart and soul into making these things great, and that are like they're doing all they can to do something that they think is the right thing to do. And they have, yes, you want them to just like be cold and hard and emotionless, but if you give them like compliments about what they do, hey, that means a lot. And if you say, hey, you built this thing and it's like awful, blah blah blah, that they're gonna receive that and process it. So you have to recognize that there's people inside.
And I think that also demonstrates, again, showing you coming and being able to be authentic and real and kind of demonstrating that we're not a big machine and we're made up of people. And I think that's
what I've noticed about that, Stephen, is even though we do have a lot of people and a lot of teams, a lot of services, individuals still make or break so many of these, where there's individual features and individual parts that you can point to and say, this was their contribution and this person did this. And yes, the team came together to make something happen, but individuals really have ownership over very specific parts of a lot of what we do.
And I think with that's something that I've experienced inside as well. When you're going and you're able to have those conversations with people and you get that authentic, they appreciate that feedback, but they also, appreciate those compliments and just taking that time out to be that
one personal goal I've set for myself for this year is I've noticed I'm not very good at giving people compliments. And it's not my actual, like my daily to-do list actually has a little section of stuff I'm working on for the year, and giving better compliments is one of the big things I'm working on.
That's something that's been a practice of mine as well. I wasn't always good at it. I was always heads down into something and moving on. And I've found the practice of making sure that I'm giving that compliment, that recognition, to take that moment, because I think it helps us all work a lot better and to be just a lot better as people. So we've got another question from Anthony Jadella. And this is a question I think I have. What is the general strategy of the team, and what metrics do you look at? How do you gauge your impact?
Okay. So whenever you get two DevRel folks from two different companies together, this question comes up within about the first 5 minutes. And it's a huge challenge, because a lot of what you do in DevRel is very, very long-term. I routinely get emails and meet people and get notes from people with feedback on things I did 5, 10, sometimes 15 years ago that say, Jeff, this little thing that you wrote, or the thing you built, or what you shared, or the visit you made to our town was a little bit of an inflection point, or contributed to an inflection point. And because of that, A happened, B happened, C happened. And those little anecdotes of the value that you add from being in DevRel, you can't put them on your annual review and say, 10 years ago, I did such and such, and that caused these people to now become AWS certified. But you routinely hear those kinds of great stories. And it's always wonderful to hear about this law. It's like we're in DevRel, we're going around and we're planting like acorns and hoping that they grow into trees. And then 20 years later, it's like, wow, look at that. The trees just grew all by themselves. And we know for sure we actually had a lot to do with making that happen. So, but on a slightly more detailed basis, we do look at the impression numbers for the blog posts. And we generally don't try to hit any particular goal as far as numbers, but we do try to use that to say, what kinds of posts seem to be the most worthwhile to our customers. So we have different metrics as far as posts about launching services, launching features, launching instance types, launching regions. Those all do pretty well. The ones that you won't see us doing, because metrics tell us, and because we hate to write them, when someone comes and says, please write us a thought piece on the future of cloud computing or the future of serverless, that whole phrase thought piece, it's just usually you can do a bit of extrapolation of we're here, we're going there, but that's not what people want. They want some like wild sci-fi fantasy thing. It has no basis in any kind of reality. You never get checked on whether your thought piece was all like great or not. And there's no actual call to action. The reader can't do anything other than think, oh, there's a lot of like kind of airy, kind of vaporous words in there when you write a thought piece. So we tend to shy away from those, both because the metrics aren't good, and both because we're like, we don't feel very good about writing them.
All right. So Jeff, we are coming up on time here for today's episode. It's been fantastic. You know, the hour flies by, or 50 minutes now flies by whenever you're having fun. So for those folks online, if you do have any last second questions that you'd like to toss in the chat there, now would be the opportune time. Before we get to any last questions, Jeff, do you have any closing remarks, any key takeaways that you want to make sure that the folks have today as part of the discussion around the blog and Amazon's leadership principles?
So I do think that communication, especially written communication, is an absolutely essential skill. And I think I don't know how it is for other people, but writing is still very, very difficult for me. When I have to start on a brand new piece of content for any kind of a launch, and you open up your blogging tool, and there's all this just white on the screen, and you're like, now what am I supposed to do? And you think that after writing millions of words that somehow there's some magic thing that makes that easy. It's actually not. And the amount of time that goes into getting like a really good title and a really good first paragraph, you'd be very surprised at how many words get thrown away in the process of writing. And if you find that writing is difficult and say, oh, well, people like Jeff, it's easy for them, 100% for sure not the case. It's always there's something in your head, and you're somehow trying to figure out, well, what words actually describe this thing or this feeling or this action that's supposed to happen. that mapping from thoughts into words is really hard. And so you just have to just jump in, and you have to just keep on doing it and be kind of self-aware about, did that really accurately reflect my thoughts or not? And if it doesn't, delete it and write it again and write it again and write it again until you get it to where you're happy with it.
Yeah. Having written blogs and things in previous lives, one of my favorite things is to commit to something that you don't really know a lot about. I actually use that as a learning opportunity. Like, sure, I'll take that. I don't know anything about it. Like the quantum computing example that you used earlier. Sure, I'll take that, and I'll learn something about it along the way, because teaching somebody or writing something to somebody helps reaffirm your own personal knowledge, I find. And that is, in my opinion, a great learning tool.
It really is. And this idea of, I will learn it and then I will share what I've learned by explaining it.
Yep.
Is so worthwhile. And you generally know, if when you're trying to explain it, if it doesn't make sense, that tells you that your understanding is imperfect. There's been times when as I'm writing something, I'm like, if I was reading this, I would think that I was just like blowing smoke. And that luckily there's like this little like detector in the back of my head that's like watching this and saying, Jeff, you're lying to yourself, and you're lying to your audience, and like delete it all and start over.
With that, we've got another question coming in from Wamslays. What do you use when you're writing your blog articles?
Okay, so I have a couple different tools. So first, I use a tool called FreeMind, which is my mind mapping tool. And we didn't talk about methodologies, but I always start by opening up the PRFAQ for the new launch and creating a comprehensive mind map with all the details that I know about the launch. So that way, on one screen, I've got all the information I need, and I can group it and organize it as I'd like. Once I've got the mind map in place, we run an internally hosted version of, it started as WordPress. It's got a lot of other things added onto it and around it. So an internally hosted WordPress that plugs into our content management system is used to actually write the text and get it published out to our CMS. I use a tool called Snagit as for taking screenshots and putting nice borders on the screenshots. And I use our WorkDocs tool to share drafts and get those to the right people. Other than that, I don't use any spelling tools or grammar checking tools or anything of that nature. Pretty much just kind of sit here and type.
I have to rely heavily on the spell checking tools myself. Otherwise I'll miss stuff. So
you got to find what works
I like
for you. Is always the thing.
Absolutely. So sharing out some of those questions, and I think we might have time for one more question in there, with any tips on from Anthony J. Della. Any tips on career progression from IC to management?
Yeah, I made the progression the other way around. I used to try really hard to be a manager, and I found that it was really difficult to do. At one point, I don't know, 5+ years ago, I remember going to my manager at the time and saying, I've been trying to manage people and give them reviews and give them growth opportunities and everything. That's just not me. I don't know how to do that properly. I've tried for a long, long time, and it's just not me. And he said, Jeff, just focus on being you, not on being who we think you need to be. And we'll support you in being a strong IC. And so one thing that I think is awesome about Amazon is we do have a really good career path for being ICs. And we don't expect that you have to be a manager in order to grow. And so instead, I try really hard to be a role model and share my learnings. I'm mentoring a couple of folks right now as well. So I don't do traditional managerial things, but I do try to share my learnings and my expertise in other ways.
Great, thanks for that
transition. I was just going to say real quickly there, Stephen, I recently made the transition from being an individual contributor to manager. And my sort of perspective on it is, I can remember back to a lot of the good managers that I've had in my life, and I try to emulate those behaviors that those managers have had on me, and try to make that, I just want to be a positive influence in your career for the time that we've been together. That's literally the premise that I try to manage my folks around.
And for me, I think it's always going back to finding and doing what you like and what you love. If you're not enjoying it, you're not gonna to really want to dive in there and really want to do the most with it. So with that, we're just at time, so we've got to wrap it up. Clint, Jeff, thanks for the time today. Everyone, we looked at the AWS blog, where it came from, and a lot of the practices surrounding it. And then hopefully you are able to take some of those practices and tenets and apply them on a project that you might be working on. Clint.
Yeah, let's bring it home, Stephen. So Jeff, thanks so much for joining us. If you're interested in connecting with Jeff, be sure to follow him over on LinkedIn as well as Mastodon. We do understand that the nature of today's episode was relatively non-technical in nature. We did learn about the blog, some leadership principles, and how Jeff uses those on a daily basis. If you do have questions that are around AWS services in usage and things of that nature, head over to repost.aws, where one of our experts will be able to help you. And if you do have any questions or comments for future episodes of AWS Supports You, you can send us an email at awssupportsyou@amazon.com. Jeff, thank you very much for joining us today. We do not have a show next Monday, since it's Martin Luther King Day. However, we will be on the 23rd, where we're going to be diving deep into Aurora cost optimization. Jeff, thanks so much for your time today.
Fun.
Thanks, Jeff.
And
thanks, everybody. Yep.
Happy cloud computing. Yep.
Have a great week. Bye-bye.
See y'all.